Let's read from the Book of the Dead. Now, the purpose of this, and I want to start a series with this, is because most people don't read the Egyptian writings, and that leaves you vulnerable for people to teach you all kind of nonsense and claim that this is what the Egyptians taught. So I just want to share some of the stuff with y'all, and I want y'all to read it for yourself and compare it to what people say when they talk about ancient Egypt, and also compare it to the Bible, since most people believe that the Bible copied from the Book of the Dead and things like that. I'm on sacredtext.com, and I love the site because they have they have old documents of all kind of religions and everything. Again, you always want to go to more than one website to double check whatever you're reading to make sure it's not made up or altered or whatever. Always look at more than one source. I've already done that. I've used this site before, so I'm here now. The Book of the Dead. If you go to this site, look at all this. Excuse me. Excuse me, I'm a little sick. It gives you all this information. Now, let me go to the intro. The versions of the Book of the Dead. If you study the Book of the Dead, not only just on this website, but any website, you'll find that the Book of the Dead is not an instruction manual for living like the Bible or the Quran. It's actually for the dead. It's actually for the people who have died. And the Book of the Dead is a book of spells that they put in their tomb with them so that they can have these spells in the afterlife to help them to overcome the challenges that they'll face in the afterlife. No Book of the Dead is exactly the same. They're tailor-made to the person who requests the Book of the Dead, and that costs money. You have to pay scribes to do that. So the Book of the Dead, initially it was just for the pharaohs, and then it became available for the nobles and the rich people. Later on, certain parts of the Book of the Dead became more available for the common people. But generally, this was a thing for the wealthy. If they have the Book of the Dead to be able to pay for all of these writings, and for your tomb, for your mummification, all of that, that's usually a wealthy person thing. That's not something that every Egyptian had. Even if you look at the negative confessions of Mott, they're not the same everywhere. It's the same thing. It apparently they were tailored to the person that whoever needed them in their burial. I guess, and you would make the confessions, I guess, that fit your life. So we're just going to start at plate one of the Book of the Dead. I'm going to skip the vignette. It's just describe Annie and his wife, and they're doing a ceremony. This small writing here is just like an explanation or an appendix. It's an explanation of what you're actually reading. That's like an insert from the writer, the translator, explaining the plates themselves. So I'm going to start here at text, where it says text right here. Text, chapter 15, a hymn of praise to Ra when he riseth in the eastern part of the heaven. Behold Osiris, Annie, the scribe who recordeth the holy offerings of the gods. Annie is the one who's writing this. Annie is the scribe who wrote this down. Who saith, homage to thee, O thou who hast come as Khepera, Khepera the creator of the gods. Thou risest, thou shineth. I'm gonna say this in regular English because this is gonna trip me up. Thou risest, thou shines, making bright thy mother Nut, crowned king of the gods. Thy mother Nut does homage unto thee with both her hands. The land of Manu receiveth thee with content, and the goddess Mot embraces thee at the two seasons. May he give splendor, power, and triumph, and a coming forth resurrection as a living soul to see Horus of the two horizons. Now I'm going to stop there. It's not the end of it. I'm going to stop here. Interesting thing of this. Khepera, homage to thee, O thou who hast come as Khepera. Right here. Khepera, and it's kind of confusing because they have all these different names for the original god. So you have Atum, you have Khepera, Ra, and Horus is a physical representation of Atum and Khepera. So it can be kind of confusing. They have so many gods, it can be a little weird. In one, what is it called? I can't remember what it's called. the Shabaka plates. I want to say the Shabaka plates, but there is a creation story where the original God is called Khepra, and he creates he creates the other gods and he creates everything on his quote unquote potter's wheel. Now, I don't know if that means literally that's what they think happened, or if it's just a figure of speech of saying that he, like a potter, created everything. I mean, it could be, most people today would say, oh, that's just figurative. But when you read some of the stuff they believe, then it could actually mean that they actually mean both. They literally believe that that's how he did it. So that's up for you to decide. Thou risest, thou shinest, making bright thy mother Nut, crowned king of the gods. Thy mother Nut does homage unto thee with both her hands. So it's saying it's worshiping Ra, the sun, and it's saying that you rise, you shine, you make bright your mother Nut, wearing your crown of king of the gods. Your mother Nut does homage unto thee with both her hands. Now, Nut is it's the god of the sky. So it's talking about the sky, but they personify it as a woman Nut or Nut. I don't know how you pronounce it, but I don't know which one of these is what they actually wrote. I don't know, but that's what Nut is, or Nut. It is the sky, and it's like almost every created thing they give a personification to. The land of Manu receiveth thee with content, and the goddess Mot embraceth thee at the 2 seasons. Mot is the goddess of justice and order. And this is the depictions of her. She's a goddess of justice and order. And again, it represents order and structure and justice and that sort of thing. But they ascribe it to a person that they actually, and it seems like they seem to worship too. So there is like a hidden meaning behind it. But yet, when you read some of the language when they talk, it's almost as if they believe they were actual people. As for Khepra, the creator god, the translator's notes or details that they give, it says the god Khepra is usually represented with a beetle for a head, and the scarab or beetle was sacred to him. The name Khepra means to become, to turn, to roll, and the abstract noun Khepru may be rendered by becomings or evolutions. The god was self-created and was the father of all other gods. Man and woman sprang from the tears which fell from his eyes, and the animal and vegetable worlds owed their existence to him. That is found in, I believe it's called the Shabaka plates. There are a variety of creation stories in Egyptology or Egypt writings. I don't understand that. But as it says here, the god Khepra was represented with a beetle, a scarab beetle. Now, there's something interesting here, because this is where the Bible and the Book of the Dead, or the Bible and the Egyptian writings can interact. If you look at scarab beetles, apparently scarab is a broad term. It is a broader term, and there's a lot of different kind of scarab beetles that fit into that classification. And the reason why I mention this is some people actually believe that the 5th plague, I believe it was, the 4th or the 5th plague that's recorded in the Bible was actually a plague of these things. Because when you look at the 10 plagues, each one was an attack on a specific god. The Egyptians worshiped the sun. So the plague that God sent the plague, I'm a Christian, so I'm going to take that perspective. God sent a plague of darkness to show them that worshiping the sun is worthless. There is a real God out there that you should worship. They worshiped the Nile, so God turned the Nile to blood. They worshiped the cattle, so God killed the cattle. Like that's the whole point. So now let's look at some Egyptian creations, statues and stuff. So yeah, these are supposedly Egyptian. Look at the rhino beetle. That's only crazy. So the beetle was revered in Egyptian rhino, or considered sacred. This is part of the reason. This is a big reason, not just this specific thing, but what the Egyptians, with the Sumerians, Phoenicians, what all these people would do is they would worship things. They would worship God or gods, but they would be in the form of animals, or they would have animals represent them. And as such, they would make sacred writings and sacred stones and that sort of thing. And in a way, they would revere created things with a reverence that should only belong to God alone. This is what the Bible is saying. So you have the Book of the Dead, kind of just, what I read from the Book of the Dead is just something totally different. Now I'm trying to explain how the Bible interacts with the stuff that the Egyptians taught other people as well. So you see these things and it's like, the Bible saying they're just animals. You're giving credit to these animals, or you're giving credit to a God that you're saying these animals represent, but these are created things. They're not the real God. You're taking focus off of God, which is why the Egyptians were not allowed to make images, because of the tendency of man to worship things they ought not, which is why the early church didn't have any images of Jesus, and the Old Testament, they didn't have images of anything outside of what was inside the temple that God told them to make. Now, this is the Bible. This is in the book of Romans, chapter 1, and I'm going to read a highlighted part and starting at verse 21. For all they knew God, for even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. And then it goes on to say what happened to them. Therefore, God gave them over in the lust of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So the Bible directly interacts with the stuff that the Egyptians taught, and the other nations too, when you read the Old Testament. This is just to give you an understanding of just looking at the two. The Book of the Dead is not a book of instruction for the living. The Bible is. But the Bible is very clear about the biggest theme in the Bible is worshiping one God and not worshiping things that are created, worshiping only the Creator, the one God. And it's interesting because when you read the Egyptian writings, well, I mean, you could say that Ra is they don't really worship the ultimate God that much in Egypt. They tend to put more emphasis on the lesser gods that they have in their system, like Osiris and Mot and things like that. So in the hymn to Ra, it does mention Khepera, the creator god, but a lot of their writings don't really mention him that much. I think one thing to note is that perhaps they don't necessarily mention Atum or Khepera directly in terms of worship, is because they believe that this Ra is the physical representation of him. So worshiping Ra to them, I suppose, will be worshiping the Almighty God. So I'm not trying to diss them or say whatever. I just wanted to put that in there. I skipped quite a bit because this is a lot, and I'm going to try not to read all of this because this is a big chunk. I'll leave a link for you to read it for yourself. A hymn of praise to Ra when he rises in the eastern part of the heaven. Behold Osiris Hunifer, triumphant, who said, homage to thee, O thou who art Ra, when thou risest, and Temu when thou settest. Thou risest, thou rises, thou shines. You who are crowned King of the gods. You are the Lord of heaven. Thou art the Lord of earth. It's hard to read this in English, regular English, because I keep seeing the words. Thou art the creator of those who dwell in the heights and of those who dwell in the depths. Thou art the one God who came into being in the beginning of time. So I'm going to stop right there because it's talking about Osiris. And then they say, you're Osiris, you're Ra, you're the one God. But it's weird because Osiris, when you read the writings, if you read the hymn to Osiris in the same book, the Book of the Dead, when you read the hymn to Osiris, Osiris was the sun god, but then he was killed by Set, and then he became the god of the underworld. So it's kind of hard for me to look at this as purely symbolic. Like, okay, this is just their way of understanding the world. It's obvious that that's what they're doing, but my belief is that they use heavy symbolism, but they literally believe that these gods that they mention exist. A lot of people will argue with me and say, no, it's just symbolic. That's just their way of understanding the world. But when you read some of the stuff, it's kind of hard to believe that, especially when they have statues and paintings and stuff like that of these various gods, and they change roles. Osiris was the sun god, and then it's like he is Ra, but then he dies. He becomes the god of the underworld, and then Horus, 80 years later, becomes the god. He becomes the sun. So to me, that's like actual gods changing office. It's symbolic to understand the world and the sun and dead and all that, but it's still actual gods that they believed in. I mean, people don't agree with that, but that's just, when you read hymn to Osiris, that's what you'll see. He was the god, sun god, and he was killed, and then he became the god of the dead, the underworld. Now I forgot where I stopped at. All right, I'm gonna start right here. Thou did create the earth, thou did fashion man, thou did make the watery abyss of the sky. That's interesting. Thou did form happy the Nile, and thou art the maker of streams and of the great deep. Now the watery, I'm not going to get into that. Thou hast knit together the mountains, thou hast made mankind and the beasts of the field, thou hast created the heavens and the earth. Worship be thou whom the goddess Mot embraceth at morn and at eve. Now, one thing I want to mention, it says here that the Egyptians believe that the god Khepera or Atum or whoever you call him, Ra, he has all these different names. It's confusing. They believe that it says that thou hast knit together the mountains, thou hast made mankind and the beasts of the field. So this is one thing I don't understand about people when they talk about ancient Egypt. Or they'll say, like, we respect our ancestors. I want to go back to the beliefs of my ancestors. But the ancestors believe that the great God, the one God, created all people. But then I'll hear people that say that I want to, I forget your religion, forget your Christianity, your Islam or whatever. I'm going to follow what my ancestors believed. But then they'll post stuff online like, yeah, the white man was made from animals, but we were the original man. That's not what the ancient Egyptians taught. The ancient Egyptians, if you look at the Shabaka plates where it talks about Khepera creating, or if you look at the history of creation or the account of Ra, which is what I posted in the conscious group that I'm in, neither one of those creation accounts say anything about, they both say that God created all men. So I don't understand when people talk. See, this is what I don't get. I just don't understand it. It's like, be consistent. Are you going to accept with your ancestors taught and properly represent them? Or are you going to just pick and choose and throw away the rest of the stuff like trash? Because that's no different than the black person that says, I'm an American, I'm not African. That's no different than the black person that says, I'm going to follow the Christian tradition or the Islamic tradition. Because just like them, you're throwing away what your ancestors taught. You're just picking and choosing what you like. I don't understand when people do that. Now, you could say, well, they didn't know about science, or, they didn't know what science says. So scientifically, the white man was created by animals and, they were wrong. Okay, but now if you're saying that they're wrong, why would you appeal to them as thus to follow their teachings? Because you're just saying they're wrong. You dismiss them. So I don't know. There's just something that I don't understand when I see people post one thing and then they post another, or they talk about this and then they do that. Worship be thou whom the goddess Mot embrace at morn and at eve. See, this is what I'm saying. Mot is the god of justice and righteousness and balance and stuff like that. So I understand that part of it is symbolic, and most people will say all of it is symbolic, but it's saying Mot embraces thou at morning and eve. Like, I don't know, whatever. Thou dost travel across the sky with heart swelling with joy. The lake of Testes is at peace. The fiend Knock has fallen and his 2 arms are cut off. I don't know who that is. The Sektet bolt receiveth fair winds, and the heart of him that is in his shine rejoices. Thou art crowned in heavenly form, the only one provided with all things. Ra cometh forth from Nu in triumph. Nu is, I believe it's chaos. Oh man, this is so many gods that get confusing. I believe Nu is chaos, but it's weird because when you read the creation account, I guess the creation accounts are just like a summary. And then when you read some of the other writings, it must be an elaboration because it doesn't even mention, whatever. Ra cometh forth from Nu in triumph. O thou mighty youth, thou everlasting son, self-begotten, who did give thyself birth. O thou mighty one of myriad forms and aspects, King of the world, Prince of Anu, Lord of eternity, and ruler of the everlasting. The company of gods rejoiceth when thou risest and when thou sailest across the sky. Wow. O thou who art exalted in the Sektet bolt, homage to thee, O Amun-Ra, thou who dost rest upon Mat, thou who passest over the heaven, and every face seeth thee. I'm not going to read the rest of this because it's a whole bunch. Just look. There's a whole bunch here. This is just plate number 1. But I wanted to read some of it. Let me stop scrolling. It's probably making you dizzy. I wanted to read some of this so y'all can understand, just to see what they write. Like, just see what they wrote, because people will tell you something. I need to go back to where I was at. People will tell you something about ancient Egypt, and because most of us are ignorant of what ancient Egypt actually taught and wrote and that sort of thing, that leaves us vulnerable to be misled. Now, I just read a whole lot of praise to Ra, praise to Khepera, praise to Osiris, praise, thou heaven and the earth worship thee, and Mot, she guideth thee, and all of this stuff. But people will tell you that they will tell you that ancient Egyptians weren't religious. They'll say that they're not religious. This is just as religious as what I read in the Bible or the Psalms. Like, this is like this, or probably even more religious because it's mentioning different gods. So I just don't, people can say one thing, but when you read the text, it says a totally different story. This is flat out worship. This is flat out worship. And it's religious. It's religious worship. Now, these are spells. So I guess when you're dead, this is supposed to be after you're dead. You're supposed to read these, and somehow it helps you to live in the afterlife. I don't know how, but whatever. I guess if you praise the gods and that sort of thing, it'll kind of make them accept you. But this is flat out religion. This isn't just spiritual. This is religion. And that's all I'm going to read. That's all I wanted to say. And I mentioned what I think is significant is when you understand the Bible and some of the stuff it says, this right here gives you a good example because it's praising all of these people or all of these different gods. And it takes the focus off of the one almighty God. There's only one God, but they have all of these different forms, all of these lesser gods and that sort of thing. And the Bible condemns that kind of thing. So it's interesting. And when you look at the 10 plagues, each one of the 10 plagues was an attack against one of these deities that they worshiped. So it's just interesting that when people talk about what the Bible stole and that sort of thing. The next video, I want to look at Mot. And we're going to compare it to the 10 Commandments because that's what people say they were stolen from.